the thing I now want to the thing I now want to bring up is the idea specifically of what does it mean zecher Amalek, because both when the Torah tells us about Amalek in Parshat Beshalach, and later when it's over in Sefer Dvarim, and it has this reprisal of this command, it doesn't say get rid of Amalek. It says get rid of Zecher Amalek specifically. It says, "Vayomer Adonai el Moshe, Ktov zot zikaron b'sefer, u'asim be'ozni Yehoshua, ki mehoemche et Zecher Amalek mitachat hashamayim." So the Lord said to Moshe, write this for a memorial in the book and recite it in the ears of Yehoshua, for I will completely put out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. And when we go to Parshat Zachor, it's the same deal. We're again talking about not just Amalek, but Zecher Amalek. So v'haya v'haniach Adonai Elohecha lecha mikol oivecha misaviv ba'aretz asher Adonai Elohecha noten lecha nahala l'rishtah timhe et Zecher Amalek mitachat hashamayim lo tishkach. So when the Lord your God has given you rest from all your enemies around in the land, for which the Lord your God gives you an inheritance to possess, that you shall blot out the remembrance of Amalek, Zecher Amalek, from under heaven. You shall not forget it. So I want to talk about Zecher Amalek because it's both important to understanding what are we actually supposed to be doing? Like what is the mitzvah ultimately? What is this mehiyah? What does it consist of? So it's just a matter of understanding how to accomplish a mitzvah properly. You should know what in detail constitutes the kiyum of the mitzvah. And so I think for that reason, we have to ask ourselves, what is Zecher Amalek? And also, I think this pertains to a related issue that's already kind of starting to bubble to the surface in present day political discussions, because a lot of people rightly are mentioning Amalek when talking about Hamas and when talking about the attacks from Gaza and the war and how it started and everything. And there already is a countercurrent in the anti-Israel left to try to accuse people who bring up Amalek of having a very sort of narrow 19th or 20th century racialist notion of what Mechiyat Amalek consists of, where it's somehow about like, let's identify a particular ethnicity or race of people and wipe them from the face of the earth in the manner of for example, the Nazis, who were basically Amalekites, were trying to do to the Jews. But it's always about, when attacking Israel, you're trying to turn things upside down and accuse the Jews of doing what other people are trying to do to them. So the anti-Israel left, and this is not just within Israel, but also around the world, is already catching. They're latching onto this use of Amalek in rhetoric going on here to talk about, what should we do now, to win this war, and saying, oh, like this is proof that now there's these maniacal genocidal intentions on the part of these crazy Jews, and that shows that things are already going in the wrong direction, ceasefire now, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a real issue to explain, what does the Torah mean when it's talking to us about Amalek, and why is it correct for us to say that we're dealing with Amalek here? And therefore, what is the Torah asking us to do? And why is that not what people who don't understand the Torah, who are just using this as a prop to attack the Jews, are saying it means? Why does it mean something different? So, Zecher Amalek, you have to look at the word Zecher. What does it mean? Remembrance of Amalek. It sounds like a contradiction in terms if you just translate it into English, because you say, okay, remember that you have to wipe out the memory of Amalek, don't forget. It's almost comical the way that it's constructed. Well, how am I supposed to not forget, but also eliminate a memory at the same time. Aren't those the same thing? They clearly aren't the same thing. So if they're not the same thing, then it must be that some part of that is not being understood properly. And I think in order to get that better, what we need to think about is like, what does the word zecher really mean? Zecher in the Torah is not just, oh, I forgot where my keys are. Oh, now I remember where my keys are, right? Zecher, zikaron, this is much more about commemoration through ritual and law and action in a way that is orchestrated, right? It's about a whole system of ideas, in other words. It's about an activity that states, let's say, the central tenets of an ideology. So how would I build up that case? Well, either with the word zachor or with the word zecher, one of the things that we can immediately study coming from the Torah is Shabbat, right? Because one of the things that we're commanded in the Torah is to remember Shabbat, but it's with zachor, right? And we have this, in Lecha Dodi, people say zachor v'shamor b'dibur echad. That's like referencing the fact that in the two different statements of Aseret HaDiburot, what's called the Ten Commandments, you have the idea of remembering Shabbat, Zachor, and and keeping Shabbat, Shamor. And there are discussions from the sages about why, you use different words. And one way of dividing it is to say Zachor is about the positive mitzvot, and Shamor is about the negative mitzvot. So Shamor, you keep Shabbat by not doing melacha, so you're prevented from certain activities on Shabbat, but you remember Shabbat by making kiddush, which is a positive mitzvah. So if we think in those terms, then Zachor, we're talking about it in the terms of Shabbat, that it's about remembering Shabbat by performing an action, which is really a declaration of faith through action, right? We make kiddush, and by doing so, we are not just remembering that it's Shabbat, we're giving meaning to what Shabbat is, and we're really saying this is central to our whole ideological system, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world and that he liberated us from Egypt, like in the very common nusach for the bracha of Kiddush on Friday nights. We say that Shabbat is both a Zecher Ma'aseh Bereshit, or Zecher LeMa'aseh Bereshit, and also a Zecher L'Yetziat Mitzrayim. It's both a remembrance of the creation of the world, and it's also a remembrance of Yetziat Mitzrayim. So the use of the idea of Zecher in that context, it's not just saying, oh, I remember something that happened to me a long time ago. It's saying we, through these actions, make commemoration of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's role in the creation of the world and in our liberation from Egypt, the center of our whole ideological system. So that's how Zachor and Zecher work in the context of Shabbat. And I think the point is we can read out of that what Zecher is talking about here, that when it says Zecher Amalek, it's suggesting there's something like the idea, the Amalekite idea, that it's like an ideological system, which we suggested before anyway, because Amalek is descended from Esav. And so there's this notion of competition between slightly different systems of ideas, right? That Yaakov went one way, Esav went another way. They both grew up in the house of Yitzchak. And there's some sense of Amalek is not just random pirates or marauders who happen to be walking through. Amalek is related to us, and in a way that tries to usurp or supplant the selection of Yaakov and of Israel as the Bechor of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the Am Segula of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And so to the degree that that's the case, we're talking about the idea and a system of ideas that rejects the Judaic idea at its core and has a violent project to try to eliminate the Judaic idea. And so it's an ideology itself that is constructed in reaction to the Judaic ideology. And it has its own kind of structure of practices and uh, declarations and everything else that are going to uh, make it into a system that can put itself forward in competition or in contest or in opposition. And to the degree that that's the case, then when we say we're talking about the Mechia of Zecher Amalek, what we're saying is it's the idea that has to die, that has to be wiped out. And maybe we have to deal with it midor dor, because the Torah also tells us that it comes up from one generation to the next. So you're never kind of finished with the job, but in every generation, and maybe let's say now approaching 100 years ago, but let's say 80 years ago in Europe, that idea was certainly Nazism. But talking about it outside the context of Eretz Yisrael is complicated. So, we don't have to go into that chapter in history. But the point is, in different generations, there are different systems of ideas that maybe end up landing on the notion that somehow the fulfillment of the purpose of that system of ideas ultimately lies in the elimination of Am Yisrael from the face of the earth. It's not always in Germany. It was maybe at one time, a system of ideas that worked that way. Now we clearly have that with certainly the system of ideas put forward by Hamas, and really more generally a broader category of organizations and movements like Hamas that all have at their core the idea that in order for their ideological system to achieve its purpose, in order for them to be fulfilled, we have to eliminate Judaic sovereignty in the land of Israel. We have to prevent Judaic worship on the Temple Mount. All of these things are somehow, defined in opposition. Their system can only be satisfied through the destruction of or prevention of the fulfillment of ours. And that idea is the one that we have a job to eliminate. And I think that the core of this observation is that it's therefore not about, okay, there's this ethnic group called Amalek somewhere in the world, and we have to find it, and we have to figure out who's Amalek, and we sort of are looking at the barcodes or serial numbers from the factory and being like, are these people Amalek? Oh, no, they're not. Okay, what about these ones? What are these ones? Okay, we found Amalek, and there's this peculiar mitzvah. We have to just wipe out, this group, and, chaval, but that's what we're being told to do. That's not how it's supposed to work. The way it's supposed to work, and this is how it can go from generation to generation, is it's about who has the Amalekite idea, and then the job is to eliminate the Amalekite idea, to eliminate Zecher Amalek mitachat hashamayim. But the point is, there are different ways of eliminating an idea. And maybe actually there's one way of eliminating the idea that has different components at some level. An idea can perish with the people who propound the idea, right? So part of what this means is war. It means you have to wage war against Amalekim. And many of them who are motivated by that system of ideas, they're going to come at you because of that anyway, but you have to come at them first, and you have to fight them. And many of them are going to end up 6 feet under when all of that is said and done. But it's not the only way to eliminate the idea. In fact, it may not even be sufficient. Meaning, if all you're doing is standing toe-to-toe on some kind of firing line and seeing, who can win in direct military combat, you may not be doing enough to defeat the idea, because ideas, as people like to point out, are very contagious and very difficult to stamp out only by force, because all it takes is a few people who still like them and propound them, and then they can convince other people to join up, even when only a remnant survives some kind of onslaught. And so you can't actually perhaps succeed in eliminating the idea just by having enough bullets, although bullets are clearly part of the equation, because these Amalekim are going to come at you, as they have done, and then you have to answer it, or ideally preempt it, and go after them with greater force. But once you're doing that, then the question is, what are the other ingredients that are needed to sort of complete the job? And that starts to move us into the realm of, well, how do ideas die, right? do ideas always stay around forever and it's actually impossible to eliminate an idea? That's not quite true. There actually are systems of ideas that one time were very influential and very popular that now, have either almost, have completely died off. No one really is an ancient Egyptian pagan anymore, for example, or have mostly died off, and even though they once ruled entire continents, things like that. So how does an idea die? Well, part of it, is time, but obviously it has to do with how the idols of that ideological system are broken before the eyes of those who are committed to those idols. It's about showing people who are clinging fast to these ideas that the symbols that are most precious to them are ruined before their eyes. And then maybe most of them will, still try to fight you to the death or whatever, but some of them may actually just pick up and grab onto something else. And in any case, the vitality of that system of ideas won't persist if its symbols and its idols are in ruins, because there won't be the same kind of intact system to pass to another generation or to sort of infect the minds of others. So that's the high level, systematic understanding or abstract understanding. And then I think the point is that when you get into specifics here, we already know what those symbols are, whether we're talking about Hamas, let's say, specifically, or whether we're talking in general, coming from the Torah, about what we're being taught about Amalek. These two things actually, it turns out, line up perfectly. Because what does Hamas really care about, right? They basically care about two things. They care about land, and they care about their particular holy sites that demonstrate the dominion of their ideology over Yahadut and Torah and the Jews. So they named their incursion that began the war after Al-Aqsa, which is a structure built on the Temple Mount with the intention of demonstrating that this mountain has now become a holding of a different ideology, and its significance for Yahadut has been superseded, right? So it's about the symbolism of the dominion of their ideology over the Temple Mount. That's, if not the central symbol, maybe it is the central symbol of their Sikh ideology. And beyond that, they care about land. They care about holding territory, conquering territory in the land of Israel to demonstrate that they are pushing the Jews out of the land, right? And they don't care about life, right? We know that. They like to die. They don't care about suffering. They like to suffer. They like to make their people suffer. There's a whole bunch of things that we normally think are the priorities of everyone who has a brain, but those aren't their priorities. The two things that they care about are land and, let's say, Al-Aqsa, or let's say more generally, using the assignment of a whole, I don't know what the word is, it's certainly not Kedusha, but holiness in English, however you want to translate it, some assignment of ritual significance to sites that can be used in a sort of supersessionist way to assert dominion over and conquest of the sites of others. And that's just an analysis of Hamas and who they are and what they believe. Now you come over to Amalek and you say, okay, how are we supposed to defeat Amalek? Well, we already actually worked that out, right? What the Torah is telling us is that you defeat Amalek because you have Hur and Aharon holding up the heads of Moshe, right? So Moshe is, the Torah comes from Moshe. The Mateh of Moshe is about how Hashem is king and he can make the world do whatever he wants to, because the staff was turning into a serpent and everything. So it's all about that HaKadosh Baruch Hu can make nisim. But then how do you support the idea of fighting for Torah and according to Torah with Hashem on your side making nisim? What do you need to support that? What are the central components of the additional kind of symbolic structure that we need to put forward in our campaign against Amalek? It's Hur and Aharon, which represent, Aharon is the Avodah on the Temple Mount. Hur, again, is through his offspring Betzalel, he's the Mishkan and the Mikdash, he's the temple. Hur also is the son, sorry, Hor also, yeah, is the son by Kalev of Ephrat. And so it's about Bethlehem, and therefore about the idea of a Messianic king, meaning a political leadership for Yahadut that is committed to the building of the temple. It's also about Ephrat and Kalev bringing the Machpelah and Kever Rachel together. So it's about, this is our land, and that we have a relationship to this land of being the descendants of the people that Hashem first gave the land to. And it all is land that we should conquer, that we should hold. And ultimately, the one who fights Amalek is Yehoshua, the one who first conquered the land, right? So it's the whole package deal is, this is the land of our heritage because of whom we're descended from, and we have to conquer it and hold it, and we have to build a temple on the mount. And those are the things that we're supposed to be doing here. But it just so happens, by no coincidence, that that's a mirror image answer to, like, what are the symbolic pressure points of the Amalekim that we're fighting, right? Of Hamas, for example. Like, what would be the greatest failure? What would be the greatest loss to Hamas that they could experience? It wouldn't be a whole bunch of their people being killed. That, of course, practically speaking, makes things more difficult for them. So by all means, that's something we should be trying to help happen. But it's not enough. And the reason it's not enough is because ultimately the symbols that nourish their whole sick ideological system that has the elimination of Am Yisrael at its core is about defending, as they put it, their symbolic structure that they've placed on top of our mountain, and holding land or conquering land. So the two things that will show everyone who's plugged into the system that its symbols are broken and failing would be for them to lose land that becomes annexed to the possession of Am Yisrael in a way that's credible and permanent, and also to lose control over Har HaBayit, and to see that the Jews are going there and becoming more involved there and are building there, and are shifting the balance towards avodah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, service of Hashem on Har HaBayit according to his Torah. So whether you think of this in terms of this is what we should be doing, or whether you think of this in terms of this is the secret formula for how to bring the symbols of Amalek to ruin nation before their eyes so that their idea becomes extinct in this generation, it's I think pretty clear that that is the ideal path for Am Yisrael. So yes, part of eliminating Zecher Amalek is about fighting people who propound the idea because they're going to come at you, and so you have to go at them first and get rid of as many of them as you can. But again, this isn't about some kind of fantasy of anti-Israel leftists, trying to accuse us of calling for some kind of ethnically specific eliminationism, but rather it's about the elimination of a system of ideas that can only be defeated if, in addition to making war against the people who propound the ideas and cling to them, we also have to destroy the symbols on which the ideas are based. And that means taking hold of our land and taking hold of our inheritance at Har HaBayit so that we can fulfill our obligations there.